So in the last video, we did an intro to a bunch of different data graphs. So if you want to go back and watch that, you can. In this video, we're going to focus specifically on histograms. Histograms look like bar graphs, but they're not. They're a little more specific than a bar graph. So for example, take a look at this data here. You'll notice each bar isn't assigned a category, it's actually assigned an interval. So like this frequency count right here isn't for any specific height of tree, it's for the trees that are between 60 to 65 feet tall. So I don't know exactly how many trees are like, I don't know exactly what their heights are. Maybe there's 3 trees that are all 61 feet. Maybe one of the trees is 61 and the other 62. I don't know. But I know there are 3 trees that are between 60 and 65 feet. And I know there are 10 trees that are between 75 and 80 feet. So that's kind of how this works. You've got like intervals down here at the bottom, and then you count up the frequency in that interval. It's basically like turning a frequency chart into bars with just like a visual for it. These ranges are called intervals or sometimes classes. So this is the interval from 60 to 65, or the class 60 to 65. And by the way, it has to be the same interval. So I notice how these are all like counting by 5. You want to keep those intervals consistent. You wouldn't want to count by 5 and then suddenly count by 20 for the next interval. That would be kind of misleading. I like to think of these almost as buckets that you're just dumping your data into. So as you make your own, I might refer to them as buckets. Okay, so here's potential data that this histogram could represent. Again, we don't know exactly, but like let's say there's a 60, 62, and a 62. Those would all go in this first interval. Notice that if the data is right on the line, so for example, what happens if I have a tree that's 65 exactly? Does it get put into this one or into this one? And typically what we do is bump it up to the next category. So you'll notice this 65 actually got bumped up with the 66 and the 68. So there's 3 in that category. You can see there's 8 of these 70 to 75s. Again, the 70 got bumped up into the next category, and so on. So this is potential data that could go with that histogram. Here's an example from my freshman class grades last semester. So I had Google Sheets make a histogram out of this, just looking at the breakdown of grades. So there were, like 16 people that had a 70 to 80. There were also about 16 people that had an 80 to a 90. There were, I don't know what this is, 17, 18 people that had a 90 to 100. And why is it showing that one person is in the 100 to 105 category? This is because one person in my class has a 100, and that actually got bumped up to the next category, so it looks like they have over 100, but they don't, they just have exactly 100. All right. Here is another histogram, and I just want to show you sometimes it might be a little more clear about the categories. So for example, on this one you don't have to worry about the whole bumping up thing, because it just says, all right, this interval is going to be from 20 to 29, and then this one's going to be 30 to 39. So as long as they're whole numbers, this will work. So sometimes you'll see these intervals written out a little more clearly, so you don't have to worry about like, oh, does this bump up? I forget. Okay, you've probably seen histograms before out there in the world. For example, I Googled Food City in Rossville, and have you seen these on Google when you like look up a place and it gives you directions and it shows you like when they're most busy? So this is a histogram. It's giving me each hour as the interval, and this is like how many people are usually at Food City in Rossville when it's 3 p.m. Today it's actually not quite what it usually is, it looks like, but like at 9 p.m. this is how many people are usually at Food City. Okay, just one more time, I want to clarify the difference between a bar graph and a histogram. A histogram has to be numbers and it's got intervals here on the bottom. Whereas a bar graph is just going to be categories. They don't even have to be numbers. Like the people who speak Spanish and Chinese and Hindi, like we could count up those things and that would be a bar graph. But for a histogram, you need something that has intervals. All right. Also, just by the way, in a bar graph, we typically put spaces or gaps between the bars just to show that like they aren't really connected. Like I can put those in any order I want. It really doesn't matter. Whereas these have to be in order. And so typically we put them right next to each other with no gaps to be like, these are continuous, they keep going. All right, so let's go through one example. And we're gonna actually make a dot plot, a box and whisker plot, and a histogram with this data. Actually, no, this video is just on histograms, so let's just focus on that. So for histogram, I'm going to draw out kind of a grid here, and I get to pick whatever intervals I want. So I get to pick whatever I think makes sense for this data, which goes from 2 to 21. So what wouldn't make sense would be like, let's count by 50s, because then it would all just be in one interval and that wouldn't make sense. So maybe I could count by 3s or by 5s, something like that. Let's maybe count by 5s. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and that will include all the data. All right, so the first interval is from 0 to 5. How many of these numbers, oh, let's make this more precise. So this is the number of candy bars. And this over here is the frequency. It's like the count. How many are in that category? So let's go 1, 2, 3. I hope we don't need more than that. Okay. In the 0 to 5 category, we've got the 2. We've got the 4. We're not going to count the 5 because the 5 gets bumped up to the next one because it's right on the line. So 2 and 4, we've got 2 in that category, so I'll make my bar go up to 2. In the 5 to 10 category, I've got the 5 and the 7, so also 2. In the 10 to 15, I've got 11 and 11, so another 2. In the 15 to 20, I don't have anything, so I won't draw a bar there. And then in the 20 to 25, I have one number, so I'll go up to 1. And there we go. There's my histogram. Note that it's going to look a little different if I'd use different intervals, and that's okay.